Sit over there, fine. And you, just sit over there, sweetheart. How are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, fine, great. All right, I'm going to start with the stories. Now, we're going to have a lot of stories to tell today. This is in memory of our dear friend John Prados.
Introduce yourself to the video audience.
Right, and I am Jim Dingman.
We're here at B&T Pizza.
We're here at B&T Pizza, the day of the marathon, located at Amsterdam Avenue at 110th Street. And we're here to celebrate the memory of our buddy, John Prados.
Hey, God bless him.
And that's what we're here to do. And what? This was his favorite pizza joint, among other pizza joints. Someone reminded me he liked Rosita's that no longer exists. That's down at, 108th Street and Broadway. He used to love to get Cuban sandwiches down there in Capico Leche. And John lived around the corner from this location at 509 West 110th. And Bill has a funny story to tell about that. But I want to share this story because this is one of the funnier stories that has to do with John. So John and I had a very close friend named Sybil Wong. And Sybil Wong was a reporter in Saigon for 5 years. She was living with the Wall Street Journal bureau chief in Saigon. Sybil was somebody who was living with Sean Gervasi. Sean Gervasi wanted John and I to help the UN Committee Against Apartheid to develop a whole analysis of the military systems and force structure in Southern Africa, which we proceeded to do. And we used to have these big parties, okay? That's the one thing to remember about John. John loved to get high, he loved to dance, he loved to have big parties.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about a couple hundred people. We're not talking about an academic party where people talk about their disciplines. In fact, we used to frown on that. We used to frown on that. So one party we had over at 98th Street, Sybil Wong had said, give me $50 and I will feed everybody. Now Sybil was from Hong Kong, and we looked at her and said, you're full of shit. No, she said, give me $50. So I said, okay. The only proviso was that Bill and I had to do all the cutting of the food. I said, okay. So we're in John's apartment. We're busy cutting the food.
Vegetables?
Vegetables, all this stuff she was making. Now someone comes in with an ounce of marijuana. And we put it out there, and someone starts to roll it. And Sybil goes, no. My nickname in Saigon was the Joint Chief of Staff. And she said, I insist that I roll all the marijuana. So she proceeded to sit down there. Bill was their witness, and just boom, 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 65 Gs within 15 minutes. And John and I are sitting there.
Yes.
And John goes, you know, Sybil, I have to try this out. And he proceeded to light it up and try it out. So that was, I have to say, that was one of the funnier moments that we had. But there are lots of funny moments. And I'm going to pass it on to Al Nofi. Al Nofi and John were partners in a business. John, well, Al, you can say what you say, please. This is Joe. Look in the camera. Let's talk.
Well, I met John at SPI. He was working on, I was doing editing and whatnot, research and designing, and like at SPI, everybody did everything. We got together and formed what we called the Morningside Game Project, because we all lived in this part of Manhattan. And we worked on some games together and whatnot. But the funniest story is I mentioned John being the ultimate student who had torn jeans, you know, and he held them together with duct tape. But the one story about John that was really very funny was when he moved from, I forget what other.
To Riverside Drive.
110th Street.
From Riverside Drive to west to 98th.
98th Street, yeah. So we're trying to move this stuff, and you know, we're all academic types, you know. There's nobody, lots of impractical knowledge.
And not much muscle.
And not much muscle.
No muscle.
And so somebody says, You know, if we lowered the bed, the mattress and whatnot out the window, we could, you know, we wouldn't have to take it down the stair. I forget what floor we were on.
Top floor, it was a top
Top
floor.
floor, but I
It's a
can't-
penthouse.
three or
Penthouse
four-
apartment,
three or
yeah.
four,
One of
right?
my stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, it's got a bunch of guys who have no idea how to, you know, do this stuff. And we've got this mattress hanging down, going like this and like that, and, you know, and we're looking at it, and it's on a clothesline with no safety line, you know, just one line, and we got it down somehow without killing it ourselves, which was a great demonstration of our skill, I suppose. And just about a week later, my then girlfriend, later wife, and I were living on 96th Street, and we moved to Brooklyn. So John came and helped us move, and he developed a very clever way. We had this nice table, you know, round top. He developed a really clever way to move the table. He just rolled it along like a hoop. You know? Fortunately, it wasn't. It was nice, but it wasn't valuable. So, yeah. But we worked on a number of projects together, and in Morningside. Was kind of the prototype of Third Reich published, and I can't remember what else. Most of the games we did were from, huh? Great War, yeah, Great War, which ended up being republished about, well, just before World War, the First World War Centennial, although it didn't move too well. There was also, I think, a Vicksburg. I can't remember what else we
You
did.
did a Napoleon 1814.
You did a game on the Peninsula War.
Yeah, Peninsula War, that's right.
You did a game on Manstein's operations.
That was John, yeah.
Yeah.
And then that became
That
Van-
Panzer Guderian, right?
Right.
Yeah.
No, the Panzer Guderian was done against
last battles.
But then the Manstein game became the
Manstein's
Manstein.
victories or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Last battles.
And most of those were all out of print, of course. And you probably couldn't even find. I don't even think I have file copies of them anymore.
Noble Knight will have them.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Night.
Anyway, so I saw John occasionally over the years, and I moved to Austin, and it turned out that John's brother lived in Austin, which I had not known. So Joe became a regular feature, and we would have a party, a Christmas party. Some of you may remember our Christmas parties. Although because we were in Texas, we no longer got like Hungarian Minister of Economics that we could get in New York, but we couldn't.
Al, can you see this? Can you turn the volume up just a little?
Turn the volume up.
We need to
Your
get
volume.
this sound system shut.
Right.
The one story that John tried to help with didn't help. When my wife was young, she was raised by her aunt, and her aunt was a housekeeper for the Brown family in Texas, like in Brown and Root.
Right.
And so the small town, the very small town she lived in, had an old army base where all these rich people had taken over the quarters. You know, like, you know, somebody, in fact, you can rent some of them. You can, you know, like you can rent General Patton's old.
Or you mean the office's homes?
Yeah, the officer's home. Yeah, and the motel there is actually the old barracks, you know. So anyway, so she knew LBJ from, well, she knew a lot of Texas politicians from when he was younger, and then of course when she was younger, and then LBJ became president. So, and she was had all these anecdotes about LBJ, including the one where her daughter and my stepdaughter wet LBJ's pants one day. Him and his cronies were, you know, having drinks, and Marilyn was bouncing up and down on his knee, and he enjoyed it. So John heard these stories and tried to get Mary interviewed by the LBJ Center, you know, the LBJ Library, and someone else tried too, and they never responded. So I guess they were embarrassed about, you know,
The real history's been
real story,
avoided.
you know.
The human side.
Anyway, that's a couple of stories about John. The
So
only other thing is
they didn't want to disclose LBJ's pedophilia?
no,
and
it wasn't,
drunkenness?
definitely wasn't pedophilia. LBJ liked big girls. But
was Texan,
the other
of
thing is, of course, John Jim Cumbo, an old college friend of mine, and I formed, having formed Morningside Games, wrote the proposal for the Gamers Guild, which ended up, creating the Charlie Roberts and whatnot. And I'm pretty much the only board gamer of my generation, board game designer of my generation, that doesn't have a Charlie Roberts.
Well, we gotta do something.
Anyway,
Hey, Al,
David, you want to say something?
Al, when it comes to war game design, you have miles to go before you sleep. You still got a shot at the Charlie.
All right, let David, got to project.
Well, it's not that, but I will just talk about John Prados' Chicken Marengo, which appeared every year for his annual Napoleon's birthday gatherings. And so that was something to be looked forward to. And of course you had the other, but it was not just for the Chicken Marengo. We had two other requirements. First, there had to be redeeming social value in that there was always a speaker and a discussion on a Napoleon-related subject. And it had to be both brief and entertaining to a group who just wanted to get to the Chicken Marengo. But, so we had that, and we had such things as such great things as talk about the Cisalpine Republic and whether Napoleon was a patriot or a nationalist or both and the difference therein. So we would have our special subject. The other challenge was to bring something to go with the main dish of the Chicken Marengo. So sometimes it was successful, and we, for example, for the anniversary of the Battle of Leipzig in 2013, we had the Buffet of Nations for appetizer, and which was to the extent that the blini, which represent the Russian army, never made it out of the freezer. And the year on which we were Napoleon in Egypt was the subject. There was a Rosetta Stone cake, a sheet cake done with hieroglyphics and Greeks, and
I can send you a photo of that.
right, John had on his Christmas card. So these were, if not, these certainly, if Napoleon couldn't get there, his memory lived on in John's parties. And Chicken Marengo.
I just thought of one thing. John was not, he didn't brag. He
He was shy.
Yeah, one year, I forget which book it was, it may have been Combined Fleet Decoded, and we, New York Military Affairs Symposium, awarded him our annual, best book. And John was surprised.
Excuse me.
John was actually surprised that he had, won this prize, and I thought that was very impressive. That he didn't say, well, of course, or something. I thought that was very impressive.
It's a great book.
Yes.
And it actually is,
That book is very impressive.
it's going to have a huge impact in historiography in years to come, because you have to completely revise everything because of that book.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
You want to say something? No. Okay. Lucia. I'll put you on the spot, Lucia.
I know.
Identify who you are and your relationship.
My name used to be Lucja Światkowski, and I was John's classmate here at Columbia. We went to graduate school. We met in graduate school here, even though we were both undergraduates, but we didn't meet until graduate school. Then we both moved to Washington, and actually one of the first things we did with David and Bob Joseph, I think, was a game on the Warsaw Uprising, and that was the first game that was ever done on this topic. Right now, they open a museum in Warsaw, they have a lot of games, but ours was the first. So I kept in touch with John when I was in Washington, and generally we work on different topics because I am sort of a Russia and Eastern Europe specialist. But then we got in touch again when he wrote his book about the end of the Cold War, and this is something that I not only did research on, but I was there actually, in Poland. And so we were comparing notes, and we were talking also about the covert operations where George H.W. Bush signed an agreement with the Polish intelligence services. Recently a book came out by John Pomfret on this, but it's not very accurate, I have to say. And we were in touch a short time before he died, and now I am writing about the Ukraine war. So we were talking, actually, there is no research, so we were talking, maybe we would have done something together, about what was called the Berg Affair, which something he covered in his book on the CIA, where CIA got in touch with the Polish resistance to the communists in 1952 and gave them $1 million, and then it turned out it was all run by the KGB. And yes, but the whole thing is that they were there and they murdered all of them, and that they put these fake people there. And I'm trying to find out more about it, but it's sort of an embarrassing topic for everybody around, so nobody wants to talk about it. And then another thing we talked about that we also thought about writing something about was Stepan Bandera. And he is, right now, he is just admired in Ukraine, and he really is an ideologue of genocide. In his name, there were hundreds of thousands of people killed, Jews, Poles. My uncle, my father's brother, who was totally brilliant, and he was murdered by Ukrainian nationalists in September of 1939, just as the Russian army was marching in. So, he actually wanted to work for CIA, but CIA rejected him because he was not morally qualified, even though they accepted a lot of very questionable people, but they decided that he was just beyond the pale. But he was working for the Germans and the British when he was assassinated. And I think that the fact that he was assassinated by the Soviets, that's what made him the hero to the Ukrainians, actually. They are sort of disregarding the previous
Bandera,
history.
you mean?
Yes, yes. So, I kept in with John, and we exchanged notes on topics, and then we met every once in a while. We had our Columbia alumni group, so I really enjoyed, meeting him and knowing him, and I wish he was alive, and maybe we would have finished some of these projects we were talking about.
Okay, great.
Greg, you want to say something? No? Well, let's work this row over here first. You guys,
Greg, you,
Eric, and you guys.
Sure.
I want to get a little more.
So, I'm actually going to first read comments from a very close friend. So,
Identify who you are.
So first I'm going to identify the person who did the comments. So Jack Rady, it was a great friend of John Prados. Jack is, by the way, the most prominent communist war game designer in the business. His politics make John look like a right-wingers. He was bodyguard for Gus Hull. He started a company called People's War Games. He writes, "Thank you for offering Brad and me this opportunity." I will tell him it should be you, Jim. "I had thought about it, but I can't think of too much or not enough. John was my brother. We enjoyed each other's company immensely. We published a game together and were constant companions at every war game con we both attended. John, Kevin Zucker, who's here today, and myself made up the three musketeers of the hobby many origins. Since Origins was on July 4th weekend, and the 2nd is my birthday, we'd usually celebrate. One year, they took me to a French restaurant, L'Empereur. At the end of a good meal, John said, 'Well, well, we should sing, huh?' Kevin growled, 'Not that dirge.'" Is that a correct quote? Yes. Okay. So I suggested we sing La Marseillaise. We three rose and belted it out.
Hold it up.
One more bottle.
One more bottle, yes.
We three rose and belted it out. When we finished, the restaurant applauded, and the lady at the next table asked timidly, "Do we all throw our glasses in the fireplace now?" I dissuaded her.
I miss John more than I can say. It ain't right. Rest in power, brother. So, anyway. So I will be brief. I will be brief. I'm Eric Goldberg. I met John 50 years ago at SBI as a 13-year-old punk, and ended up playtesting for him as a 15 and 16-year-old punk. I was fortunate to work on Pearl Harbor, his Game of the War of the Pacific, which I think is his best undersung design. I always enjoyed that John made sure that we had plenty of marijuana to go on. The game was not so well tested by the time he got to the Battle of Lady Gulf in 1944 because clouds of smoke distracted from the game. Sorry, sure. And the other thing I will always remember about John is, as was mentioned earlier, he was an introvert. I was a tester with the full brashness of a teenager who was, all I had going for me was I was smart. Social graces, none, none, and so on and so forth. I was good at testing for edge cases, as Jay and Brad and so on know. John would actually listen to me, draw things out, and actually get comments that fed back into making a better game. He was a very good listener, he was a very good teacher, and I really regret that I only saw him several times in the last 30 years. Rest in peace, John.
By the way, that suggests something we should do, maybe at the tail end. We should have a group sing of La Marseillaise, because we're not going to have any Napoleon dinners anymore. So,
Why don't you just lead us in it right now?
But Napoleon banned the Marseillaise. They did not, well, despite the movies, they
like
did
that.
not
I
use
like
that.
that
that
of
would reflect
Napoleon's
the fact,
birthday.
Al, that while we appreciate Napoleon's qualities as a military leader, we also think he was a fucking tyrant, and we want to get back to the real revolution,
Yeah, but
okay?
yeah.
Are you guys ready? Here we go.
Now, well, you know damn words.
Allons enfants de la patrie, le jour de gloire est arrivé. Contre nous de la tyrannie, l'étendard sanglant élevé, l'étendard sanglant élevé. Attendez-vous dans la campagne, mugir des féroces soldats qui viennent jusque dans nos bras, égorger nos fils et nos campagnes. Aux armes, citoyens, formés au bataillon, marchons, marchons, qu'une sang impure abreuve nos sillons. Hey. Forget the next 5 verses.
I will get them and we can sing along.
We all forgot them. It's an astonishingly bloody national anthem. By contrast, the Star Spangled Banner is defensive.
The Star Spangled Banner, the 4th and 5th are quite.
Well, the 4th and 5th, but
They
the
defend
first verse,
slavery.
the 4th and 5th. The one we always sing is very defensive. We have a fort, you're bombing it.
American Cafe? So this is now Rick's American Cafe?
Right, yes.
Where's Paul Henry and where's Humphrey Bogart?
Well,
It's Rick's American Cafe minus the small group of SS fuckers playing Fox Don't Rhyme on the piano. Right? We get along without that now.
well, I like that idea of an annual party for Napoleon. I think that's a lot of fun. All right, Brad, you want to say something, Brad?
I'm Brad Hessel. I started at SBI in, well, I playtested a bit in the early 70s, but I didn't start work there until after I graduated from college in 75. So I didn't really intersect with John directly, but I did get a chance to work with him on one game. I think it was Casino, if I remember correctly, which is not a very well-known Prados game, but he was a joy to work with. I mean, when Eric was talking about how he talked to playtesters, I mean, it was with everybody. It wasn't just playtesters. He was very, very receptive to suggestions and really listened to what you had to say and interpreted it in a way that made a lot of sense for the game. At least that was my experience. The thing that did impress me actually wasn't so much even that. Even before that, my impression of John was very positive just because it reverberated through the entire staff at SPI. He was kind of like a guru that had like a gray eminence, or he wasn't gray yet, but I mean he could have been. And you know, Frank Davis, David. The only other person that maybe came close to John in the kind of pantheon would have been John Young, I would say.
Yeah.
So I kind of think of those two guys together. Yeah, he was very, very well respected, and of course the respect went far beyond just folks at SBI. The whole gaming community had that kind of image of John. So that was my experience with him.
Frank, you want to say something? No? Okay. No? Oh, Brad. Brad, go on, Brad. Oh, Kevin, excuse me. Yeah.
So I'm Kevin Zucker, and I met John 50 years ago at SPI, and he was there to meet with Redmond Simonson because Redmond had a problem with his game that they were publishing in S&T. It was Year of the Rat. So it was about an offensive that had just taken place in Vietnam a few months before. And Redmond was a conservative, I would say, and he had been in the Air Force, so he had issues with John's outlook on the Vietnam War, I think. So they had to, so I saw John sitting there for the first time. He was sitting waiting to meet with Redmond, and he was sitting on the phone. And he was so self-contained and so self-assured, and so, you know, his energy was very peaceful, and but you felt that you felt there was a power there just by seeing him sit there. And he went into the meeting, and you know, he had to defend his position, but he's very good at that. And Redmond would respect you if you fought back. He respected that more than if you just caved, right? So they became actually good cohorts and worked together on several projects. So that was how I first met John. That was
1972.
72, right, so it's more than 50 years ago. So, and then the other thing, I used to hang out with John when we both lived in this neighborhood. And he had this special way of not only rolling his J's, but he would take a hit, and then he would get the smoke up in his nose, like that had escaped, like he didn't want any of that smoke to get away. So he'd go this way, and he'd, you know, somehow, and the other thing.
French exhale, it's called.
Okay, there you go. So it even has a name. And but he loved to get high and then drink coffee. He liked the best coffee, so he
Jamaican Blue Mountain.
Jamaican Blue Mountain.
Yeah.
So we had many a day with John sitting there, getting one burst of energy and then a complimentary one. So that's what I remember about John.
Okay. All right, I wanted to amplify what just was said by Kevin. John and I were working with Vietnam Veterans Against the War at that time when he was designing the game. And at that time, there was an unprecedented breaking of law going on. Basically, GIs in Asia were calling up the National Office of VVAW, which was on 28th Street, and reporting their movements, saying our battalion, our air wing has been mobilized to go to the theater of operations in Southeast Asia. And we were actually sitting there collating this information. This is when he was designing the game. I mean, a lot of people don't know this. So that was an amazing aspect of that. He was, you know, we were sitting there, oh my God, these guys are calling up, like a guy would call from Okinawa. My Marine Battalion is now afloat. It's going to go off from Okinawa, from the 3rd Marine Division. It's going to be afloat off the coast of Vietnam. So this was an amazing, because this is a court-martial offense. People were just violating it like cats and dogs. And John was working on that with me. Now the other thing I want to mention about John, my mother loved John. My mother was, you know, Al's met my mother, Bill's met my mother. My mother was quite an unusual one. She was the first female hired to be in a Fortune 500 company in a corporate position. She was, in fact, the only woman there for quite a while until she hired women to come in and work with her. And she was part Cuban and Spanish. So the two of them, she'd always say, whenever John would come, whenever she'd come to New York, you got to call John up. I want to take him out to dinner. And we always would do that. You know, you said, where's John? I want John over here. And he'd get on the cab. We actually, I remember one time we paid for him to come in a cab to go down to the Italian restaurant I was working at. Now the other thing, when Senator McGovern came to teach at Columbia University, myself and Larry Weiss, which you may remember Larry. Larry was he was in comparative politics in the political science department. He was a China specialist. And Larry was assigned a task to be Senator McGovern's teaching assistant. So what we did was, we had, I was working in a restaurant at La Grosseria on 6th Avenue and West 4th Street at the time. Al has stories about me when I was at O'Henry's. But anyway, I said, you guys come down and we're going to construct the entire class. So what happened was Larry and John came down. I'm sitting there pumping them with chicken franchise and booze and shit. And they constructed a class for 250 kids, which was an innovative class with Senator McGovern teaching the class. Now another thing that Lucia may remember is when Henry Kissinger was offered a professorship at Columbia University. He was offered a full tenured professorship, and I remember John freaked out and everybody else around me freaked out. And John was part of the group that put together memos to send to Henry Kissinger's office in Washington, D.C., which Larry Weiss would deliver to his office in Washington, D.C. All right? And so that was one of many things that happened. I had the pleasure, one day we actually had him in International House, and everybody was on one side of the street sitting there screaming about Henry Kissinger. I was with a whole bunch of people who were Chilean exiles. And they had a reason to hate his guts because they'd been, you know, they suffered as a result of the coup against Allende. So as soon as Henry Kissinger came out of the door, I had a lot of fun letting the son of a bitch have it. And that day, someone who will remain nameless, because he now works in the federal government, I called him up, I said, we could have gotten that thing. And he says, really?
Done what?
Well, we could have done all
Lynched
sorts
him?
of,
You coulda hung him?
we could have finished the son of a bitch off. And John heard this story and was laughing his ass off and said, you know what, you guys got to get stoned, man. You know, you got to cool your shit. And so we went and got drunk and stoned that day after wanting to say, oh, we could have triangulated Henry Kissinger. I said, no, let's just cool it. And so that's just one of these kind of stories to tell.
What?
Anyway, that's, but Billy, go on.
Well, what chair was Kissinger's?
He was
being
offered a
named?
full professorship at Columbia
What,
University.
the-
SIA.
The Reinhard
In the-
Heydrich Chair of Genocide
He was
Studies?
going to take over the
Well, he
entire floor
I
at Columbia.
can tell you. No, he
He
did.
never came. He
did.
never came.
There was a conference room in the School of International Affairs, which was his desk. Because I got the front page, I took a photograph after the bomb went off in his conference room. I got the front page of the New York Times.
Really?
So it was,
First and only time in your life, or did you have it a couple other times?
oh, I had,
Front page New York
I got
Times.
front page New York Times about 5 times.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Well,
That was the first time, because I got the smoke coming out and the fireman coming in, and somebody put a pipe bomb in his
well,
It wasn't Jim.
no, it wasn't me. And I want to add this. I want
It
to
was a
add
weatherman.
this.
It was a
No, I want to
weatherman.
add this. Well, that was.
It
I'm
was
glad you brought.
Nofi. It was
I'm glad
Nofi.
you brought up the weatherman.
He's a weatherman.
Because one of his closest friends, David Grad, a friend of mine, and I believe Billy knew him.
Yeah.
He was the son of Frank Grad. He was the youngest person arrested in 1968. He was 14 years old. And he got his ass kicked. He became a weatherman.
That's in Chicago.
He became a weatherman. This is before Chicago.
Frank Grad,
Frank,
the
no,
kid,
Frank,
the 14-year-old
David,
kid?
Frank Grad's kid was David Grad, and he got messed up and got radicalized him. He joined the Weathermen.
At age 15?
At age 14, 15, he's a Weatherman. So he remember, he would sit there and tell John and I the inner stories of how crazy the Weathermen were. So for example, in Flint, Michigan, and this is, we're sitting there smoking a J, John, we're sitting there laughing our asses off. He says to me, "Whoa, remember when Bernadine Doyle made those stupid comments about Charles Manson? Like she was so," and he says, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, what happened, man?" Well, what they did was they had Hawaiian Punch. They threw all their THC, LSD, and mescaline into the Hawaiian Punch and then took it. So he figured each person there was high on about 1,000 mics. And John would sit there and egg David on because, you know, he'd say, "Well, wait, how could they say something insane like that? That, like, isn't it groovy that Charles Manson did this?" But that was one of his good friends, and I might add, I could get into other nefarious activities between David and John, but I won't. But they were close buddies, and it was always fun. David would come in. He's a big guy. He's about 6'5", and he would come in and sit down, and he'd start telling John, "So what are you doing, man? You like, how can you write a dissertation stoned all the time?" And that's one thing John did. I'll never forget. But anyway, that's I'll pass it on to Billy because I'm starting to remember all this crap that we used to do together. Go on, Bill.
Yeah. Yeah, one story I tell.
Well, identify yourself.
Yeah, I'm Bill Geisler. I knew John from a dormitory in Columbia.
But Bill, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party of the United States?
No, I have not, to my knowledge.
Okay,
I don't
good.
remember back that far.
Let's clear that up.
Okay. But one story I tell, kind of comical, is that in 1976, during Operation Sail, when the sailboats came to New York and they went up the Hudson River, well, John had an apartment on top of a 5-story brownstone, and he had the roof. So he had to go someplace else that
You had to
weekend.
go to Puerto Rico.
We went to Puerto Rico. So he said to me, gave me the keys, and said, "Look, why don't you have your friends over and have a party and see Operation Sail?" I said, "Okay." So I called you up, a couple other people, and we gathered together, to have a party. Well, it turns out the word got out in the neighborhood that the best view of Operation Sail is on Riverside Drive on the rooftop of a brownstone. So we got 200 people, very
Put
well
a ticket
behaved.
price on it.
Very well behaved.
Very
20
well
bucks.
behaved. The local butcher showed up with a bag full of chicken. You know, he cut it all up, and other people showed up with cases of beer and in a 12-pack of wine, and one lady showed up with a basket of lettuce to make salad. So all of a sudden we had this impromptu party a la Woodstock on top of the roof. It went on for 12 hours. People were coming and going, and you know, one lady shows up with toilet paper, with a bag of toilet paper, and so when it was all over, you know, I'm looking at him saying, "My God, what do I tell John?" You know, he expected 6 to 10 people, and I had 200. So then the next
But the
morning,
apartment was okay,
and
right?
it was
No, it was
okay.
totally
okay.
clean.
The next morning, people in the building
They
came
came
up,
and cleaned it up.
and they scrubbed it with Brillo pad, and it had never been that clean again. So a couple days later, John comes back and says, "Oh yeah, did you have the party?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Wow, it really looks nice clean." And he kind of like wanted to ask me how many, but
We told
you
him.
know,
We told
yeah,
him.
we did later tell him, but initially he was like, "Wow," you know. But there were literally 200 people on that rooftop going up and down during that Operation Sail. It was really a lot of fun.
But the pièce de résistance that night was at the end of the party. One of our friends worked worked at Saturday Night Live, so he says, "You know, we got to go down to this party in Lower Manhattan, man." Because it was like, I never saw Manhattan like that before. It was probably like what it was like at the end of World War II.
Yeah, it
Everybody was
really-
on the street
It's really
celebrating.
well behaved.
So we go into this building, and the elevator's not working. I remember rubbing it into John. I told him the story, and like we had to walk up the stairs, and we come into this apartment, and there is John Belushi, Chevy Chase, Gilda Radner, the original cast of Saturday Night Live.
Dan
I used to tell him,
Aykroyd.
I said, Dan Aykroyd, I said, John, you missed that, you son of a bitch. And he would laugh. He would sit there and crack up. We'd always sit there and tease him. You know, remember you missed that party with Saturday Night Live because you were in Puerto Rico, baby. And we would have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, it was good.
Leonard. Come on, Lenny. You got a lot to say.
Very good. Just tell us.
I'm gonna keep it simple.
Your name?
My name is Lenny Glynn. I am not now, nor have I ever been, a member of the Communist Party of the United States. Whatever kind of left-wing views I've held and still held, and fuck you. It's a free country. I go back with John to college years. I think I crossed his paths when we were both undergraduates, but I'm not sure of that. But I definitely made the connection with John at Simulations Publications. The two of us became pretty good, fast friends, and that lasted a half a century until I was shocked with the awful news of his dying. Left me quite bereft. When I think back on memories of him, though, only we did a couple of games together, which usually consisted of me having an idea and then John executing it, followed by a gushing tsunami of royalties that sometimes came to like $180 or $350 or some gigantic sum. But I have really basically two core memories of him, apart from all the friendship and kindness and everything. I weirdly remember walking toward his place on Riverside, down from West End Avenue, shall we say, down the hill toward Riverside, and it was, I don't know, September 15th or something, or mid-September, late September, and we're together, and as we turn the corner, there's a breeze, and there's just the very first undercurrents of winter in that breeze. And John comments on, winter's coming. And somehow it just sticks in my mind. From that day forward, every time I feel the first cold breeze of winter, in late September, early October, I think of John. And the other is just an image of him in that apartment where he had a charcoal brazier on the minimal porch. He had a porch about the size of one of these tables, or two tables, and he had a barbecue thing out there. He was very prone to eating gigantic slabs of meat, steak, looking like they came off a brontosaurus, frankly. Usually eaten rare, along with, he made a good salad too, coffee if you wanted it, plenty of beer, reefer, etc. But I remember him spending some time with him that afternoon, and he was sitting down on a pillow, like a beanbag pillow. He had a table in front of him, a sizable coffee table, on which there is a game that he is developing. It's got lots of moving pieces. And he's paying attention to this game. He's also smoking a pretty potent reefer. He's on the stereo, which was a actual stereo. KLH type of thing with a vinyl record turning. His Procol Harum's album, Salty Dog. The tune It All Comes Back is on. You guys know that. It all comes back, someday it all comes back to you. So that's playing, and he's playing the game, and folded on his left knee is Marshall Zhukov's memoirs. So he's getting high, listening to Procol, testing a game, making barbecue. The fucking guy knew how to multitask, you know? amazing. I mean, we all, I think, suffered a terrible loss. And all I can say is which I believe is a general rule, applies to the death of a puppy or a grandmother. The pain that you feel when that happens is precisely reciprocal to how good the love was. And so there's always that hypothetical question, could I get rid of this pain and never feel it? Suppose that was on offer. But the price to collect that offer was, well, that's okay, but you will never have known John Prados. You just wouldn't have known him. Or your Uncle Bill, or your dog, Weasel. You just won't know these things, these people. But you'll be spared the pain. So which do you take? I take the pain. I take the...
Yeah, John leaves a big gap in all of us. My intellectual compañero. Anybody down there want to make a comment? On this side of the aisle here?
I'm just going to wait until Danny Prados, our daughter, should be arriving any moment. And I think I have some stories she may not have heard yet. So when she gets here is when I'll want to talk.
Thank you so much. Any of you all down there want to say something?
I'll say something.
Please.
I didn't have the pleasure of knowing John as well or as long as any of you. I knew him through the wonderful Ellen Pinzer, and he was a frequent guest with Ellen at my parents' house in Somerville, Massachusetts, in Davis Square, at a time when there was a used bookstore in Davis Square. And I remember going once with them. John had visited before, and walking into this bookstore and seeing everyone who worked there snap to attention as John Prados walked in, because they knew that they were going to be selling a lot of books. And it was just inspiring to know that no matter who you are and how small the audience for your book, there will be someone, probably John Prados, but now maybe someone else who will buy that book. It was just his reverence for the written word, for information, for the exchange of ideas was inspiring at every level. He was also a very loving man and a gentleman, a true gentleman.
All right, and you guys over there? Oh, we got Jay over there.
Hi, I'm Jay Nelson. I knew John for over 50 years through SPI and the whole gaming community, but eventually I fell out of the gaming story and moved on with life. As John Lennon always says, life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans. And but I knew John along the way, and I miss John most because he was a level for me. He was a ground for me. Because I'm a hyperbolist, I'm a panic artist, I remember calling him once and saying, oh my God, the Russians are going to reach the Persian Gulf through Afghanistan and we're all going to die. And he would listen to me. He would listen to me and he'd say, well, why do you think that? And I'd like, well, the Times says this. Well, why do you think that the Times says that? Well, because, and he'd talk me through the whole thing and reach me down to the level where he would say, that's not going to happen and you don't need to worry about it. So I miss that level with him. And he's the only person in the world I could ever call up and say, when Halsey and Nimitz had only one carrier left in the South Pacific, and they made the decision to do this, well, then what do you think about that? Should have been another decision? I don't have that in my life anymore. I feel alone on a promontory in some ways with that interest. And one other memory I have strong of him is one of the last trips we took together, we went to the Cedar Mountain battlefield in Virginia and spun it like a top. We went all the way around it, saw it from this angle and that angle and this angle and that angle. And, I miss that experience too. So that's what I have to say about John.
back there. Richard, you got something? You and Roger want to say something? Richard?
Well, I only know him from playing Third Reich, his great game Third Reich, in which I haven't played in about 40 years, but I will be inspired to pick up again the third edition of it.
Cool. What about you, Richard? Yeah, go on.
All I can say is I wish I knew him the way you guys did. My first recognition of John was a photo in Moves magazine when I was like, I don't know, 16. And he was said something ironic, how he had submitted his first game design idea to Avalon Hill, and he got back after months of waiting, apparently, it said, a little note that said, "We don't take ideas from people." And that was my first impression of John. And after that, I met him twice, briefly, through Jim, and then, of course, read a few of his books and thought to myself, what an astonishing guy to be able to go into all those archives and ferret out how the government's fucking lying to us all the time. You know, it's genius to have the patience and the knowledge to do that. And then to cap on Roger's statement, playing his games. The game was genius. It was a brilliant game. And it just, you might say, infected me with the idea that I'd love to know him better. I really am sorry. This guy is just a bit outside my full acquaintance zone or friendship zone. And I envy Jim that he was such a good friend of John and had so much experience with him. Like I said, I wish I knew him as well as many of you did. I really do.
All right, well, all right, let me just... Let me bring up something when we're talking about this. I remember when I gave John $50 to go get the Pentagon Papers. And the son of a bitch didn't get it to me. He said to me, he went down to Washington, and we're going to a big demonstration in January of 1973. It was after the Paris peace talks were signed. And he says, I'm going down there, Jim, and I'm going to get you the Pentagon Papers, and I'm going to get it too. I said, here's $50, man. And he said he got the last copy at the GPO of the Pentagon Papers. All 14 volumes, just before they declassified it. Now, one of the things that, that always cracked me up was his experiences with the departments at Columbia. One of the things that he was able to do, because there was such disruption in the academic school year, was he essentially took, I think, close to 20 or 30 credits of independent studies that basically formed the basis of the scholarship that he did on the Vietnam War ever since. Because basically, you could get away with murder back then. Shut the place down. You could come in, and then you could take like 6 or 7 credits independently. They did that the whole damn time. Because when I first met him, I said, this is around the time of the Year of the Rat. Because Dunnigan, had said, you want to, here's this kid from Columbia. You want to work with him? And I said, okay. So we worked about it, and I said, oh, John, you might as well do the game. Fuck it. You can do a lot better job than I can. But John had mastered the basic history of Indochina. He had learned how to speak French. And he had as a teacher Gabriel Coco. Now Gabriel Coco was a big revisionist. He came down here and taught in a summer school. I think they tried to get him tenure, but it was one of these lefties they threw out. He wound up in Canada teaching.
Back when they still threw lefties out.
Well, they threw his ass out. Anyway, John, when he was basically got a full fellowship to the political science department, the history department drove him out. They had a guy there who was a real schmuck, who actually went after a whole bunch of friends of mine who were doing their dissertations in the history department.
What was his name?
Oh, it's English. He taught English history.
Ken Jackson.
No, it wasn't Ken Jackson. He had a different experience with Ken Jackson. Ken Jackson betrayed John because Ken Jackson was his advisor and didn't stick up for John. And Ken Jackson became the big urban historian, but he was a newly minted professor at Columbia. He didn't have tenure, so he sort of abandoned John in the middle of that fight over John, because they were saying, how'd you do 30 credits in Vietnam studies? What the hell's going on here? And so when he got into the political science department, he said to me, you know what, I'm going to answer all the questions according to, in the spirit of William Appleton Williams. And I looked at him and I remember laughing at him. I said, they're going to fail your ass, man. And he said, I don't care. And so he took...
This was Prados?
This is John, yeah. So he took his writtens, answered them according to the line of you know, like Walter Lefebvre, you know, sort of left-wing critiques of American foreign policy. They failed his ass. And then I said, see, I told you. He says, I don't care. I wanted to make a point. I said, well, you made a point. You know, they took away your scholarship. And then he said he used the money to basically do the research for Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. That's how that came into existence. Because he said, you know what, I'll just do this. And so, and I remember laughing hard, you know.
He transferred into SIA.
Well, no, he didn't transfer it. He just used that fellowship to do the work that led to Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Because I remember that was created around the corner here, in that apartment at 509 West 110th. And as I said when we were down in Washington, if there's anything that always jumped up in my mind, because John we had a mutual friend, lady friend, who was a big Frank Sinatra freak, and his song was "I Did It My Way."
Right.
That was the theme song of Mr. Prados. Now, I know he loved everything else. He loved the Rolling Stones. We used to sit there and listen to Rolling Stones music. Jumping Jack Flash, that boom, I'm thinking, and we'd sit there and groove to it, and we'd get up and start to dance, because John loved to dance. And so there's all this stuff, and in fact, when we do these parties, we would deliberately do them because we'd say, you don't want to have an academic party, we want to have a fun party. We want to have a good time, and we made sure every time we had a party, we had a good time. In fact, we got famous for that. And John was a co-conspirator with myself and Billy when we did that. Anyway.
Jill's got a...
Jill, please.
Okay. Now that my daughter Danny Prados is here with her friend Julia. Hi, everybody.
Danny.
Woo! One of the best Prados' productions. So my name's Jill Gay. And it was great to hear you, Jim, talking about the McGovern class, because that's where I met John Prados, a.k.a. Gatto, a.k.a. Papa Gatto. And so I kept seeing this really cute guy in the McGovern class, and one time he came up to me and said, let's go dancing. And my answer was, when? And we did. And I loved hearing you talk about all the parties, because honestly, we spent so much of our time at Columbia going to dancing parties. It's a miracle we both graduated. It was really pretty amazing. And so, we did get divorced in 2000. We had Danny in 1980. We got married. We met in 1976. We got married in 1984. We had Danny in 1984, and we had Tosh in 1989. And we both were involved in PS SOC, which was the committee to get rid of Kissinger, and we succeeded. You know, they wanted to offer him a full professorship, and there was so much rabble-rousing by me, Gatto, and so many of us, and so many of you.
Dingman was in that, too.
Dingman was in there. So many of us that they withdrew the offer to Kissinger. It was a huge slap in the face. But we were so thrilled that that war criminal did not get a professorship at Columbia University.
He's still alive.
Yeah.
He's still alive.
I know, isn't it frustrating?
Evil goes on.
It's like we said about Franco when Franco died. Viva la muerte. Long live death. Which was relevant for Franco, who way outlasted. And so we lived in a number of places in New York. I can't even remember all the different addresses. And in one, we had a party, like you're talking about, Jim, where we had a rooftop. It was a small apartment, but had a rooftop, which was great for dancing. And we just said, let's invite all our friends. At that point, I graduated and I was working in East Harlem. And we had this amazing party. There were so many people. It was so much fun. We danced, we drank, we had a great time. But I was really disappointed because I had reached out to the people I'd been working with in East Harlem and had asked them to come. And the next day when the next Monday when I went to work, I was like, what happened? I didn't see you guys. And they were like, Jill, we were there. There were just so many people. It was hard to maneuver through it. And that's what it was like. We had so many friends over and fun. And then I got work in DC, and Gatto and I were, commuting back and forth, and finally he said, let me move down. And I said, great. If you move to DC, I will live wherever in DC you want to live. And he was like, next to the Library of Congress, duh. So we did. We rented a house on 9th and South Capitol, near the Capitol, 9th and 904 Southeast. That's the house where Danny was. She was born in a hospital, even though we tried to give birth at home, but that's where we were living when Danny was born. And then at that time, when I moved to DC, I started working for Isabel Letelier, whose husband was blown up in Sheridan Circle in Washington, DC, and I worked a lot on human rights and Latin American. It was the Institute for Policy Studies, which was headed by Mark Raskin. His son, Jamie Raskin, is my congressional representative and has led the impeachment hearings.
Bravo for him.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I love Jamie. And Gatto very much was drawn into that circle at IPS with Dick Burnett and Mark Raskin and Roger Wilkins and the whole gang. And we had lots of fun, and we both had meaningful work, and then we had kids, and we had a couple of memorable trips. We once went to Bolivia, and we got into the bus, and then we decided we were going to go to Cochabamba, and we took a plane into Cochabamba. I remember you.
I remember you. We had lunch together.
That's right.
For lunch.
Yes. I remember you at the house. Yeah. So we went to Cochabamba, and at one point I said to Gatto, these guys that are at our same hotel, they really strike me as like narcotraficantes. I'm a little nervous here. I think we should go back to La Paz soon. And Gatto was like, okay, well, let's see. And that night we had dinner at the hotel. And I'm like, Gatto, I really think we need to leave. I'm really worried about the narcotraficantes. And Gatto starts hitting me under the table. And I'm like, why are you hitting me under the table? And he's like, okay, we're leaving. Leaving in the middle of dinner? Never. Gatto would never leave a meal. We both loved eating out. We loved eating. We loved food. He was a great cook. And we got into the room, and he started barricading the door with every piece of furniture that was in it. And I was like, what's going on? And he was like, So you had your back to them, but there was a curtain. That's where they were. And I'm like, Okay, so we got a 6 a.m. flight back to La Paz, but the guys were on the same plane. So we were like, so we got off the plane and like ran, caught the first cab out the line and like made a beeline and escaped because they couldn't catch up with us.
It's like a Quentin Tarantino movie.
It was scary. And then we had, so I went to Cuba for my work with PAHO, Pan American Health Organization. And before then, Gatto and I were running around DC, and Gatto was like, the Cubans are taking pictures of us. And I'm like, Gatto, I know you've been in the field of the CIA and the NSA for a long time, but I really think you're getting a little paranoid. And he's like, no, I don't think so. So I went to Cuba. The Cubans showed me the photographs of us in DC. They wanted him. And they were very frustrated with me because I was like, I'm a feminist. You can't get to my husband through me. You have to go through him. You have to ask him directly. The other memorable trip was with me, Gatto, and Jay Nelson. And we met Jay in Paris, and we went to the Maginot Line. And originally, of course, originally I was like, I want to see beautiful French countryside. I don't want to see battlefields. And they're like, we're going. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to miss out on this. So we all went. We went on the train. And we went to the Maginot Line, which turns out is the most gorgeous French countryside. So everybody was happy. And then we went to this little village where we stayed. And what was it called? Longuillon. And we had a meal. And I remember Jay ordered French fries and then asked for ketchup, sauce de tomate. So they brought him like a hand-pressed tomato sauce that was amazing, right, Jay? So, so one of the most incredible things about Gatto was how revolutionary he was for his time in terms of gender norms, in terms of women's equality. Because when we started talking about having kids, and I read this book called Who Shall Raise the Children by James Levine. And it was sort of this radical experiment. I think that this was still in the 70s when we were in Columbia. And it was about how there were these rare men in the middle class or upper middle class who would take care of their kids. And so we talked about that, and he was like, I really want to do that. I will work part-time, you work part-time. We will take turns taking care of our kids. They're going to know both of us. They're going to have both sides of us. They will get, everything from you and from me. And so he did that. He was absolutely, now that's pretty common among the younger generations, but in 1984, it would be a parenting group with, 35 women and Gatto. And so he was really so far ahead of his time on that issue, and so amazing with both our daughters. He cooked all the meals, he played with them, he taught them things, he just loved his daughters.
He taught them the vowels when they couldn't even talk, when they were in their little bassinets. He's going A, E, I, O, U. And I'm like, John, whoa. But it worked somehow.
It did.
I don't know how.
You're right.
Oh, they both do know how to talk, Jay.
But he'd also we'd have this globe. He bought this globe, and he'd spin it around and then point at something and go, okay, Danny, Tosh, what country is that? We're like, which one, Papagato? So, you know, he was just always teaching them and loving them and coddling them and just amazing with them. I haven't seen many of you for about 25 years or maybe longer. And so just a brief update on me that I'm in a second marriage. I met Stuart Shapiro in 2002. And, we got married in 2005. I worked on global public health in Asia, Africa, Latin America. Gatto was 23 years of my life, a huge part of it, and an amazing co-parent.
I know, Danny, it's a tough act to follow.
I just got here.
Well, we're gonna put you on the spot, girl.
Okay.
Hold on, Jody, gotta change the camera?
Jim, David, I gotta slip around.
It's a green.
I'm not quite sure how to follow that.
Identify who you are.
Hi.
Wait till we got the, I don't think we have the camera.
Let's take a breath. Everyone have some water. Are you hydrating?
Maybe.
Yeah, somebody send
The kitchen can work.
Wait for everyone to.
Let us know when you're ready.
Okay. So sorry.
Yeah.
Good. So sorry we're late. We took the first train up to New York and came as quick as we could, but New York is New York and waits for no beast, creature, or human. Thank you so much for having us, and thank you, Jim and Bill and Lenny, for setting this up and for inviting everyone, and it's so wonderful to see all of you. And I hope that after the video portion of the evening, there will still be stories and we can still chat. I have been coming to this pizza restaurant since I was a little girl. And there have been stories in my life about this restaurant and about the Hungarian pastry shop, otherwise known as the Cave of Treasures, up the street. It's been a huge part of my life, even though I didn't grow up here. And when I lived here, I lived in New York. I still sort of have a foot here, but I lived in New York for almost a decade. And when Gatto would come to visit, when John would come to visit, inevitably, if I would say, would you like to get dinner? He said, absolutely, meet me at V&T's. So it's really, really special to be here and to share this with all of you. And if you do eat meat, the sausage and onion, I'm sure, as you know, was his favorite. And he used to love, while he was here, telling stories of other times he was here with many of you, and who told the most outrageous stories about which covert op from 1944 while consuming the most wine. There were tales of legend. So it's just really special to be here and to see all of you. Actually, we were, so I was in DC last night, and my sort of brother and Julia, and I played one of his favorite games we used to on Christmas, play Lord of the Rings Risk, while screening all 3 films in the background. It was very important to tune into certain elements, quote certain things, remember all your vowels, and how the lore played itself out in the game was critical. I unearthed a page of house rules
from 1999, written in his impeccable
Cursive.
handwriting. It was like,
Beautiful.
I will
handwriting.
never
Like a
live up to
school
this.
teacher.
How am I supposed to? I can talk, but I can't write like him.
Right.
And it wasn't quite cursive, and it wasn't quite, not script. And he always turned the page exactly 90 degrees so it wouldn't smudge. You can tell he combined decks from multiple games because he liked certain cards and he wanted more of them in this edition. But he marked them by cutting precise 90-degree arrangements from circles and putting them on those cards. You would know exactly which ones to extract should you want to recreate the earlier version. He taught me so much of who I am and how I learned how to learn. I did learn those vowels, although he was decimated that my first word was horse. He really wanted it to be him. Or at least Tolkien. I mean, and he taught me and Natasha how to read. And I'm not quite sure how he did it, other than the vowels, which I don't remember exactly. I know that when I think I was 3, we started reading The Hobbit. He started reading The Hobbit to me. And by the time I was like 4 and a half, we were in the middle of Return of the King, and I was reading to him. No idea how he did that.
Bravo!
Yeah, we were pretty spoiled for education. And when I got to 2nd grade and we were supposed to be reading like Amelia Bedelia, I believe there were a number of very frustrated parent-teacher conferences because they thought I was cheating, and there was a whole situation where I bit a kid's ear. Don't worry about it, it's fine. The fighting spirit from the family kind of lived on, as well as the lack of respect of authority for authority's sake. You learn to respect someone for their ability and how good they were at their job and how kind they were and their intellect. But just because someone was in a position of authority didn't grant them automatic respect. Which also... I don't know. That got me in a lot of trouble later, you guys. It's still getting me in trouble, to be honest.
Hey, Danielle, but that's the price of freedom, man.
Yeah, let me know how that experiment works out for everybody.
We're working on it.
I know, me too. Let's see how it goes. But, we had this day of game playing yesterday in preparation for today. And it just reminded me of all the Saturdays that he would have so many of you over. And it would start in the morning with coffee, and it would end late at night with beer. And we cycled through pretzels and popcorn and the dining room table, which, to be honest, wasn't really a dining room table. It was a table that we dined on maybe twice a year when we had relatives over for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And the rest of the year, that was where the games lived. So we ate it in the kitchen. And so these beautiful, expansive, complex games would unfurl on this table. And it was this beautiful, magnificent cult of you re-excavating history and re-strategizing, rethinking how every little maneuver and how the weather on one day affected the course of history. And that multiplicity, and the idea that we were talking about how many games, I mean, we have a lot of games, and switching from one game to another and starting us when you're very young, this idea of multiplicity of perspective, constantly shifting the angle of your opinion, like looking at a situation from every given angle, trying to understand a fully dimensional situation is one of the best lessons I've taken with me in my life, along with the reading and the militaristic drilling on how to cook things properly, starting from this is how you boil water, and if I can trust you to sit here and learn how to boil water for 6 months, maybe I'll let you touch a carrot. And moving forward, all these methodologies of, he always had the long game in mind. It was there's never shortcuts. There was never a quick fix. You always did it correctly. You always did it methodically. You always executed impeccably. And that was it. That was the only way to do it. And there was always probably another answer that you hadn't thought of. I miss him very much. I think he would be so thrilled to be here today. He would be at least. He is here. Absolutely.
Still in the corner smoking a doobie.
And have eaten at least 2 pizzas by now. Yeah, there's many more stories, but I will happily share them. I don't know where we're at in the room of speaking. I don't want to take up all the air.
You're going to be the last one.
Oh no, that's the worst. I want to see the video.
Well, we're filming it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do want to say something.
Sure, please.
Okay.
That was very, very good.
Okay, thank you. All right.
An inside shot. Look John's heart.
My name is Ellen Pinsler. Many of you may have seen that on email, but many of you have never met me before and will probably never see me again. John and I met in 1996, and in the year 2000, I moved from Boston to join him in Washington, D.C., or Silver Spring, Maryland, to be more precise. And I was interested in all these stories. I've heard some of them from his perspective, not from yours, and I can try to put them together in my brain. But what I would like to say to all of you, in addition to thank you, is in Jewish tradition, you tell people who are in mourning and grieving, may his memory be a blessing. And take that with you, because John's memory is a blessing.
All right, it's not like this is a continuing, look, all of us are torn by not having him here with us in all different ways. And I want to thank Ellen, Danny, and Jill for coming today. Unfortunately, we don't have Natasha here. But all of us loved him in different ways. And I lost somebody who I could call up at a drop of a hat and talk about any goddamn thing I wanted to. And who had been an intellectual compañero and partner for decades. The kind of things he and I would organize events, organize conferences together at Columbia and elsewhere. And not having John around has been a big gap, because I can see a lot of us have a lot of different knowledge and interests that he had. And so it's good to look at it as a family coming together in honor of John. Because I love this idea of chicken Marengo. Boy, when I heard you guys were doing a chicken Marengo Napoleon thing, I said, God damn it, I've never cooked chicken Marengo. So I took a couple of recipes and I came out with a pretty badass chicken Marengo. But I also think I love the idea of sitting there, because we're going to have that movie about Napoleon on Thanksgiving. It's going to be, so I would definitely want to resuscitate that tradition. But I just wanted to add another little color that some people don't know. John was very much involved in the anti-apartheid movement. Around the corner from where he lived at 98th Street was a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. He became a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. His name was Patrick Lawrence. He went off to Asia to be the editor of Far Eastern Economic Review. And I recently tracked Patrick down. And unfortunately, he couldn't come today. There's a whole bunch of people who couldn't come today who conveyed their condolences. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get the internet working because I was going to bring them in by Zoom. But John would come over to the parties we had for the members of the African National Congress, SWAPO, ZAPU, all the liberation movements in Southern Africa. And Jill referred to that party. Well, that's the party the Joint Chiefs of Staff comment occurred at, when Sybil showed us Smarty Pants how to roll 65 joints in 15 minutes. But John was, we didn't talk about his intellectual contributions to our society, to everything that's done. John was a strong, independent voice. His work was always based on solid archival facts. Okay, one thing that I always, whenever I deal with my colleagues in Pacifica, some of them are just out to lunch. They don't base anything on facts. And so John was very much like that. He made some controversial assertions, but they all were based on facts. There was no deconstructionism in his voice. John was sort of light on cultural history, I gotta say. When I was living with somebody who was a cultural historian, John came down and visited us, and it was. But John was, again, a gracious soul. Always someone who was very respectful of other people. And again, it's just great to have everybody here talking about this. Some of us have different levels of relationship with John, but I think it was a good thing to have a pizza celebration in honor of his memory. And next time we do this, I'll get a friend of mine who has a brownstone, and we'll really have a good time.
Okay, are we wrapping up, Jim?
I think we're sort of wrapping up, yeah. You want to make some last comments, Bill and Lenny?
No,
I just, one thing I think of John is his apartment always had 2 typewriters. What he was working on and what he was just about finishing up. Right. He also had, he introduced me to the Krupp's coffee grinder. He was the first person I knew who had a Krupp's coffee grinder, and Jamaican Blue Mountain. And also he had a KLH Model 20 stereo, and he wore out the motor, and he gave it to me.
Jim, this gentleman is trying to start to pay the bill.
Oh, well, let's get the waiter over here.
Yeah. We gotta, I'm sure this is...
Yeah, I'll take some donations.
Bob has put forward $10 for his slice of pizza.
Go on.
Donations, I'll put it on a card.
Yeah, go on, finish.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's all right. But once you get the ball rolling, we gotta make the settlement of the costs.
Also, I remember visiting John in Tacoma Park with Jill, and he got up very early in the morning and he made the breakfast for the girls first. I remember pancakes, and how he would be singing to them around the house. He woke them up by singing to them. That was a very pleasant.
He sang to you.
I also remember a trip we once took out to Harper's Ferry with Lee and John and my wife, and we spent a day trip to Harper's Ferry and driving through that part of Maryland. But basically, I remember him just as a friend. I was not a gamer. I wasn't necessarily a military historian person, but I was just a personal friend. And I remember him from college very well. And with Jim, we used to give, I would be one of the 3 amigos creating the parties.
He was a good heart.
Right.
Good guy.
And I remember how he discovered Jamaican Blue Mountain.
I think that was fashionable in Colombia at the time, because everybody I know was drinking Jamaican Blue Mountain.
Right. Well, how he discovered Jamaican Blue Mountain was the first Vietnam veteran who ever went to Hanoi, whose name was Joe Ergo.
Oh, yeah.
Joe Ergo was an air policeman at Tan Son Nhut during the Tet Offensive. And Joe became he's still a member of the Revolutionary Communist Party. It's sort of like he was a gung-ho Goldwater guy, Catholic boy, Italian-American from New Jersey. His 2 brothers went to Vietnam as infantrymen. Joe became like a communist. But He worked in McNulty's Coffee and Tea place on Christopher Street.
Next door.
And that's where Joe was working, and Joe, at that point, Jamaican Blue Mountain was cheap. So that's how he got introduced to Jamaican Blue Mountain through Joe Ergo, who is a sort of interesting little character, but nevertheless, I remember him coming to my house because that's when I was getting introduced to Jamaican Blue Mountain. And so we all loved it. It was a constant high. So I wanted to look at, the footnote is on Jamaican Blue Mountain.
Yes.
But thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Jim, we got the waiter coming over. We got to settle up this bill, give people estimates of what they owe, whatever. Not going to be easy.
I had my 7
That was good.